All right. My name is Susan. I work at UC Berkeley Office of Environment, Health, and Safety, and I lead the UC system-wide Field Research Safety Center of Excellence, along with my colleagues, Claudia Ali from UCLA, Haram from UC Davis Bodega Marine Lab, and Bernie Fitzsimmons from UC Office of the President Advanced Services. I'd like to welcome you to this training. We've already had many valuable conversations putting together the content and getting to know the speakers, and hope that you also find it valuable, and ultimately that this training helps you to be safer and more successful in the field. You'll be able to interact with each other in the breakout room activities, but I want to point out that we have participants from field science disciplines from across the University of California, as well as guests from Oregon State, Utah State, Colorado State, Stanford, NOAA, California Fish and Wildlife, California Academy of Sciences, and others. So welcome to everyone. We look forward to learning together. So a huge thank you, most importantly, to our speakers. We'll be covering many important, challenging topics in this series. And today, Chris Lay will get us started and focus on leadership skills that will improve communications and outcomes in the field that are relevant to a broad range of hazards and challenges. As the training progresses through March, we'll build on these skills and tackle more specific and challenging scenarios. Please note in the schedule, we've shifted the March 24th workshop by 30 minutes to accommodate a live noon panel with the researchers that are featured in the film Picture a Scientist. So look for an email from me soon with more details on that and a link to screen the film. A few simple instructions and then we'll get started. Please keep your mute on. Our workshop is scheduled to be 3 hours long, but there are activities and breaks. We'll be using the breakout session guide that I shared via email, which has specific instructions for the breakouts. And at the end of each section, Chris will answer questions. So if you put that into the chat in the main room, we'll be able to review questions numerous times throughout the workshop. And then in the end, I'd really appreciate, we will share an evaluation form, and I'd appreciate it if you can take some time to provide some feedback. This is all new content. So feedback is extremely valuable. And everyone that fills out an evaluation form, I want to mention, will also be entered into a raffle, and we have these pretty nice logo Nalgene bottles, leadership training Nalgene bottles that are stuffed with like a whistle and some first aid supplies and some field snacks that we'll be raffling off for everyone that fills an evaluation. So thanks in advance for doing that. So again, the chat feature in the main room will go to the speaker and to everyone. If you use the chat feature in a breakout session, just be aware that it only goes to your group. So you'll notice some reminders that if you have questions for the whole group, wait until we get back to the main room before adding that to the chat. All right, with that, I will turn it over to today's speaker. Welcome, Chris Lay. He is the Administrative Director of the Ken Norris Center for Natural History at UC Santa Cruz. You ready to go, Chris?
I'm ready.
All right, I will stop my sharing and he'll take over his slides.
All right. How do I start this? Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay, well, hi everybody. I can't really see you, so I can't say it's good to see you, but thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to do this. It's really been fun working with Sarah and this team over many years now, trying to increase the field safety resources on the academic research side of universities. Like Sarah said, I work at UC Santa Cruz. I'm the administrative director of what's called the Ken Norris Center for Natural History. And this workshop builds on my workshop we did a year ago. And I think I titled it something about creating a safe learning and working environment in the field. And this is a little more specific about improving communication in the field and as a result, improving outcomes. So let's see, oops. So I just want to give you a little overview to start off with. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I want to go over the format. This is different than what we did a year ago, longer and more participatory. And so we'll talk about that. And I want to talk about field group challenges and try to summarize a lot of the feedback you gave us before this workshop, and also use some of those examples in this workshop. I want to talk about solutions to communication issues that come up in the field, and they'll boil down to group structure, building rapport, and just building your own skills. And the skills that I really want to work on with you today are active listening, giving and receiving feedback, and resolving conflict. And the best way to really do that is to give you a chance to discuss them with people in smaller groups. And we'll do our best to entertain questions and engage with you. It's hard. There's a lot of you out there. So I'll just say a little bit about my background. Like I said, I work at UC Santa Cruz. I basically work at our Natural History Museum. I have a dual position where I manage the Natural History Museum here on campus, but I'm also a field instructor. And so every year, that's a normal year, I get to go out into the field with students and practice all this stuff. My background comes from more of a programmatic side of outdoor education. I spent a lot of time as a NOLS instructor working for the National Outdoor Leadership School, many of you have probably heard of. For many years, I was a Wilderness Medicine Institute instructor. I also worked for the Outdoor Recreation Program here at UC Santa Cruz. And coming from the programmatic side of outdoor ed, there's a lot of emphasis on setting goals, roles, expectations, creating safe learning environment, working on your communication skills, having a supervisor to give you feedback and talk about your course. And it's just not there as much on the academic research side. So it's been Sarah, when I met Sarah, I was like, okay, like I can really be a resource here and help bring some of that programmatic wisdom from these large schools that do this kind of thing in remote settings. And I'm excited to have worked with Sarah for many years. We helped make together the Field Operations Safety Manual many years ago. And then we've been doing these risk management workshops the last few years. So this workshop's different. I'll talk at you, obviously, but I want you to participate. And I ask that you set aside your other work as best you can. I know it's very tempting to just have your email window open, in the upper left or whatever. Try to put it away and focus on this. And we will have time for you to actually engage with other people and talk about scenarios and your own experience and practice some of these communication skills as best we can on Zoom. I think we all know how to be Zoom mindful, but just be extra aware of muting yourself, and use your video if you're able to, particularly when we get in the breakout rooms. The chat might get totally insane, so I know people will have questions, but try to minimize putting things in the chat. We will ask for your input, so we'll ask you to put things in the chat. It's important that you're welcoming and respectful. You're going to be paired up randomly. There's no better way we could think to do it. And so you're probably not going to know the folks in your breakout room and what their experience is. So please be welcoming and respectful. Strive to do more listening than talking. And one thing, I'll say this more, but we're going to have 3 breakout sessions throughout this 3 hours, and we'll give you instructions, and we'll come up with ways to give input, and we'll try to address your questions and your thoughts in that. And yeah, I guess I'll say more about that once we get to the first breakout. So you gave us a lot of ideas. This was just one of the many screens that you posted. We called this is a Jamboard. We partly wanted to just give you access to Jamboard if you've never used it before. It's pretty easy. It's just a community bulletin board where you can put sticky notes. But man, there were a lot of issues. I went through those Jamboards several times. I have a long list of things. And I'll be honest, like a lot of them, I put like, well, I'm not sure how to deal with that one. That's a tough one. But I did have some ideas on a lot of things, and there were definitely some themes, and I tried to bring up some of the themes in this workshop. So that was really fun to read through all that. So I just want to jump in here and talk a little bit and preface our first breakout session with a little bit of overview of why communication is important and tools that you can use as a leader or a group member to really improve communications and improve outcomes in your whatever field setting you're in. And I start this off by just saying, accidents are going to happen. And we've all probably experienced them, even been part of them. But rarely do they happen randomly. If you reflect on them and analyze them, they result from a combination of things. Oftentimes, the challenging conditions of being in the field, your inadequate preparation for those conditions, and then a big one that often is overlooked is poor communication. Poor communication can lead to accidents. And I just want to give you a few examples. I know you probably understand this, but here are a few examples of how poor communication can lead to accidents. Let's say you're on a course and you never set the expectation for no rock climbing in your group. And 3 days into the trip, 2 of your group members go off bouldering and they end up hurting themselves. There's an example. Or maybe you didn't brief your student group when you sent them off to go collect some data for the day and make sure they understood that they had to turn around at a certain time and they needed to carry all these things with them, like a headlamp and a map and whatnot. And what happens is they stay out too late, they come back, they get lost in the dark, and you end up spending a really scary night trying to find them. Or maybe you didn't create a safe space for your group to speak up and give feedback about unsafe conditions. And maybe you got to a place where you needed to cross a river and some people in the group saw that it was unsafe, but did not feel empowered to speak up. And as a result, you went ahead and crossed that river and then maybe there was a near miss. Maybe somebody almost swam or something like that. Or maybe there's just a high frequency of minor accidents that's plaguing your group due to many unresolved conflicts in your group. There's just poor communication. And it just leads to a constant state of frustration and distraction. Or to a bigger, longer term example, like maybe the culture in your field group over years has led to viewing your lead researcher as someone who can do no wrong. And because there's no self-reflection, there's no course trip evaluation by program supervisor, and you get what I call a halo effect over the lead researcher. And it eventually leads to the group never questioning their decisions, and sometimes the leader might cut a few corners and not be questioned on it, and a big, sometimes tragic accident can happen. So there's some examples of how poor communication can just increase the likelihood of accidents. And they also have other problems too. They can hamper your group goals. I think everybody is familiar with that, leading to inefficient, inaccurate data collection, whatever your goals are with your field team. They can also lead to less enjoyable experiences. I'm sure we've all been out there with groups where it's like, man, this just sucks. I can't wait till it's over. And then because we're in the field away from our support network, sometimes those communication issues can cause real psychological damage. And So for all these reasons, it's really important to address this and keep getting better at your communication. So I looked through all your sticky notes, and I tried to summarize some of them in 3 categories that I saw them. And sometimes it might help. Maybe this model doesn't help you. But if you imagine you're in a boat with your group and you're sailing to this island, and that's where your group goal is, sometimes the waters can be really rough, and the issues that come up around communication can come up around at the group level or the person-to-person level or the intrapersonal level, and they all can be difficult to deal with. And just briefly, I'll just give you a few examples. In the group levels, group norms can form like without your control. Like, you know, by day 3, suddenly it's like okay for everybody to be late to a meeting, or crude jokes are just okay in the group. And it's suddenly a group norm. Inclusivity issues can come up in your group, and they might cleave along gender lines, along racial lines, along experience lines, along fitness level ability, along age. They can come up, and a lot of you mentioned different ones like that. There's power dynamics, absolutely, between your leader team and your group, but also perhaps within your group members, particularly, especially if there's experience differences. There can be there can be distrust and tension between your leader group and your group. And that can come up for a variety of reasons. On the person-to-person level, there can just be conflicts that arise between individuals, and you've got to deal with it. And then there can just be a norm of like not giving feedback, and so people aren't giving people feedback, and they end up gossiping a lot and just being really frustrated and seeing no way to like remedy the situation. And finally, over here, the intrapersonal, like I find as we go to the right here on this, like the interpersonal can be really tough to deal with as a leader or as anyone in the group really, but sometimes you have an individual in your group that just falls way outside your group norms, and that can be really challenging. They might be ostracized by the group, or they might actively just be disregarding the community expectations for some reason, and that can be really challenging. My point, though, here in this beginning part is to tell you that there is the possibility of smooth sailing with your group towards your group goals. And I pulled this quote right from one of the sticky notes. This sounds like a great goal: to get the job done safely, do good science, all while creating opportunities for learning and making sure all participants have their voices heard. Yeah, that sounds great. You can get there. So rough waters are not inevitable. And that's what I want to start off by just introducing you to, and then we'll dive into some of these communication skills that can help smooth the waters. But I want to break it down into leaders. Leaders have really powerful tools. And stopping there for a second, I know all of us aren't leaders. We might be more group members or sort of in the middle of the hierarchy of leadership in whatever you're doing. But as a leader, you have the most leverage over your group. And it's just really important to remember that what you do and what you don't do really has huge ramifications on the trajectory that your group goes. And you have the most leverage at the very beginning of your group experience. And so those beginning hours or days are super important if you're the leader. Now, a lot of you are group members, and I just want to point out that you are not at the whim of everything else. You have some powerful tools that you too can use to help steer your group into calmer waters. And you know, I say this all with the caveat that some groups are still difficult. And I'm sure we've all had experiences where it's like, well, I'm just giving up. Like, I don't know what to do. And I have had those experiences too. Uh, they can just be tough. Every group is different. So let's talk about what some of those tools are. And we'll start with what can leaders do to help steer us into those calm waters and avoid some of those issues that you all raised. So before a trip, leaders can plan ahead and prepare. They can engage with supervisors and, you know, get feedback from their previous experience. If they're keeping feedback, they can meet with you can meet with your co-instructors and form a team before you're thrown into the field together. You can make a field safety plan, and we're really trying to make more of an effort to like give people resources and prompt leaders to really think about different things in their field safety plan. And I'm just going to throw this out here. This is why I wrote this in green, to all the supervisors that are out there who are, you know, maybe working for environmental health and safety and you know, managing all these different field opportunities that are going on at your different universities. On your field safety plan template, do you have some kind of part that basically helps your leaders think about how they're going to structure a safe learning and working environment on their course or trip or expedition or whatever? A lot of times what's on that field safety plan is like, okay, where's the nearest hospital? You know, what are you going to do if somebody gets bitten by a snake? Those are important things, but prompting people about like, you know, what's your effective communication plan with your leaders, with your leader team and with your group, that can really help as far as preparation. When you're out there in the field, like I said, you have the most leverage at the beginning, and that's where you want to really establish clear structure to what you're up to. Discuss your goals, discuss the roles that your leaders play, that you play, that your group members play. Make sure you cover the expectations you have of everyone on the course. Go over the, you know, the non-negotiable rules. Talk about behavioral norms and see if you can get buy-in from the group. Have a conversation. Don't just share it with them, but engage with them and ask them to contribute. What are your goals? You know, what do you think? What's important to you for a safe learning environment? I do this all the time. And on a big field course, it can take hours to go through this and make sure people are clear and bought into the structure. Don't view it as a checkbox. You might have to come back to it and maintain your structure and revisit in the future. But you have to do it at the beginning. That's where you have the most leverage. Another big one is to build rapport with your group. This is sometimes overlooked, and some of these things are really simple things. Be present with your group. A lot of leaders just show up at times just to give directions and don't spend any time hanging out with the group, listening to the group, engaging in a conversation rather than just saying what needs to be done for the day. Think about that. How much time are you engaging with your group and what are you doing? Are you mostly just barking instructions at them, or are you actually hanging out with them too? Do your best to learn their names early. It really matters. Listen, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Give lots of positive feedback. We're going to talk more about that. Invite people to give you feedback. Make it clear and welcoming and safe for people to give and receive feedback. Take time to have fun with your group. Let your group members contribute. Train them well, trust them, give them some responsibility so that they can feel ownership in what you're doing. And then finally, just be humble. You get major cred if you take responsibility for difficult situations. Even if it's not your fault, if you take responsibility and show that you're stepping up to help the group deal with a difficult situation, that makes a huge difference in building rapport. So Finally, I'll say learn, role model, and teach leadership and communication skills. You can take classes, you can reflect yourself, you can get feedback from peers, from supervisors. You can take leadership skills classes. Like I teach the stuff also in like risk management, risk analysis, judgment, decision-making, leadership styles, that kind of thing. You could take classes and learn more about that. You can also take classes like this where we're practicing communication skills. So you can learn them yourselves, you can role model them on the course, and as you get comfortable with them, you can teach your course how to do this. It's not that hard. We're doing it all the time. And you just have to find the time and the energy for it. So I want to also be clear before we jump into our first communication skill is that group members have tools too. You are not at the whim of the rough waters that you see your boat sailing into. You can do 3 of those 4 things. You can encourage and support group structure. You can build rapport with your group. You can learn, role model, and teach leadership and communication skills. Even though you're not deputized as the leader, you can adopt a leadership mindset, which means you can just be supportive in whatever role you are in your group. And I just want to talk about ways you can encourage and support group structure, because you're not the leaders. You're not going to be able to set up that safe learning environment maybe the way you want to, but you can support your leader in doing so. You can follow their lead. You can give them feedback. You can step up for them and support them by being there on time and reiterating the importance of something that your leader is doing. And if the structure is unclear, then ask, who's in charge? What are our goals? What is my role? What are the general expectations of the group? How can I get feedback? How can I give feedback? What resources can I go to if I have an issue? If I'm feeling unsafe, what are my options? You can ask for that. So now I want to jump into our first skill. So I told you in the overview that we're going to do 3 things here. We're going to talk about active listening, feedback, and resolving conflict. So the first thing we want to just start with is listening, active listening. And honestly, as you go through this, I hope that you'll find that active listening is something you have to do in everything you do as part of a group. If you can get better at active listening, you will improve in all aspects of your leadership, regardless of whether you're the team lead or you're a group member. So this is an important skill to not overlook. You can always get better at it. Some of us are already really good at it. I have to keep reminding myself. So what does listening do? It invites everyone, if you have good listening and you set that tone on your course, it invites everyone to speak up, question, and share observations without fear that they're going to get shut down in some ways. And you want to be able to get your group to not only pay attention to things that you want them to improve, but also things that they're doing well. So when you give good listening, you're able to make sure everyone feels empowered. And I'll just give you one quick example of how listening helped me in one situation where I was a group member in a group. All of us were standing on a steep snow slope. I was the only one facing uphill. And we were just sitting there talking about, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but we were in kind of an exposed place. And it was only me that noticed this rock starting to fall from up high and rolling down the snow slope. And I sat there for like 1 or 2 seconds, and then I just immediately spoke up. And it was because my leaders had created the environment that made it okay for me to speak up. And I said, I just interrupted the leader and I said, holy cow, we got a rock coming, we got to get out of here. And that leader immediately stopped what he was doing and just took off and got everybody out of the way. And that rock came right sailing right through where we were standing. So it obviously helps for safety, but it's also the most important way to build trust and connection with your group. So let's talk a little bit about it, and then I'm going to let you practice. So I think you probably, as you look through this, there's levels of listening that range from ignoring all the way up to this thing in red, listening in order to understand. I would imagine that you can relate to listening in order to respond. A lot of times I feel very like I'm paying attention to someone, but I'm always thinking about how I'm going to respond to someone when they're speaking. We want to go a step further in active listening and get ourselves out of the picture and just listen to someone else in order to understand their perspective. So seek first to understand, then to be understood. So what things can you do as a listener to really be that, to seek first to understand, then to be understood? You can slow down, be patient. And when you're actually engaged with someone in conversation, strive to be actually listening, which means to be silent and giving your attention to them, 80% of the time. But what it doesn't mean is that you have to just completely shut up and not say anything. I bet you can relate to when you feel like someone's really listening to understand you, that they're engaging with you. They might be paraphrasing things that you're saying. They might be offering occasional words of like, yeah, I get that. And yeah, that makes sense. Or they might even be asking you questions. Hey, I don't quite understand that. Can you say a little bit more about that? You don't have to just say nothing, but you want to be letting them do most of the talking. You want to make eye contact. You want to use open body language. Both can be hard on Zoom, but you can still try it. And you want to really try to paraphrase what you heard and check for understanding. So a lot of times what I will do is when someone's finished sharing, or maybe it's even in the middle, like I'll say, well, hold on a second. Let me make sure I understand what you just said. And then I'll just try to repeat back what I heard them say, maybe using their exact words, or maybe just slightly summarizing, using some of my words, but trying to use their words as much as possible. That's what I call paraphrasing. And then you can also ask non-directed questions. Questions like, can you say more about that? Let me see. Oh, can you give me an example? These are questions that are directed towards them, not towards you. What you want to try to avoid is turning the conversation to yourself or giving advice. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. So I want us to try this, and we'll see how this goes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open the breakout rooms. We're going to put you in groups of probably 4, and most likely you don't know each other. So for the sake of efficiency, let's go in alphabetical order by first name. So 1, 2, 3, 4, figure out which number you are. And the first part, I want you to just introduce yourself. Oh, and I should jump back for a second. We have a breakout session guide. A lot of you already looked at it, but I think we're going to share that in the chat or something like that. But make sure you open that breakout session guide. It has full instructions for this first session in it. But first thing, figure out what your order is. Introduce yourself. We gave you a few questions to answer to introduce yourself. Your name, where you work, what position you're in what you do, and what you hope to get out of this workshop. And then we have a question. And I want everybody to practice answering the question and also listening to the person answering the question. And the question will be in the breakout session guide. And I guess I don't even have it right here in front of me. I could paraphrase it, but you'll want to read it once you get into your breakout session. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to go around and answer that question and have one person talk and then one person practice active listening. So 1 can talk, 2 can listen, 3 and 4 can observe. And then once you're done, give yourself a couple minutes for that. Take a few moments to let 3 and 4 offer any quick feedback to the listener before switching. You know, did you paraphrase? Did you ask some non-directed questions? You know, were you able to make eye contact as best you could? You could offer some feedback. Remember to offer positive feedback as well as improvables. So, and then we'll just switch. The second person will talk and answer the question, and 3 will listen, while 4 and 1 observe, and so on. Try to do that in about 10 minutes. And then we'll just offer a little 3-minute time to like discuss anything that came up. And one thing we want to do, this is where we want to try to get some input from you. If you came up with some valuable wisdom on listening, put it as, make a sticky note and put it in the listening jam, on the listening Jamboard. One thing we're going to ask is that not every single person in this workshop open up the Jamboard at once. We're afraid it'll crash. So just get one person from each group to open up the Jamboard. There's a link in the breakout session guide, and you can add any valuable wisdom. And then if you have any questions, save them for the chat when we get back in the big group. When we come back in the big group, we will just take a break. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll do a little debrief. We'll try to address some of the questions you had. We'll look at the Jamboards, and then we'll move on. So let's see how that goes. So does anyone want to add anything? Like, did anything come up in the chat or anything? Okay, then you'll be invited into a breakout room. Oh, don't forget your breakout room number in case you get dumped from Zoom. Like, there's going to be 50 breakout rooms maybe. So remember your breakout room number so that if you get pushed off Zoom and you come back in, you'll come back in the main room, and then just tell us your breakout room number and we'll put you there. You know, hopping across a river that should be evaluated first before you just like cross that river. You want to give them constructive feedback. But you also want to give positive feedback to the person in your group that sits back and really analyzes the whole situation and is very attentive to other groups' to individual needs, and, you know, supports group decision making. And it might be hard for you to see that because they're quiet. And so you have to be even more deliberate about giving that positive feedback to them. So the second part here is give lots of positive feedback. We thrive off positive feedback. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard this in many places, like strive to give, you know, way more positive feedback than you give constructive feedback. It's important to, as if you're the leader, especially to invite others to give you feedback, both positive and constructive. That is one of my expectations that I talk over right at the beginning when I talk about what a safe learning environment is. I expect everyone, you can expect us to give you positive feedback. You can expect us to receive feedback from you. You can give us feedback, and we expect the same of you, all those, your group members. And we role model that from the beginning. So the equation here, like I just keep this in the back of my head, especially when I'm thinking about feedback. Like one woman I worked with many, many years ago just summarized like effective communication in this very simple way. It's honesty plus tact. You really have to have both to be effective. And I just return to that a lot, especially when I'm like in the charged situation where I'm trying to give somebody constructive feedback. Choose your battles. Like, you know, not everybody's going to be receptive, and you're going to run out of energy giving feedback about every last little thing. So we'll start with receiving feedback. This is something you have more control over because it's coming to you, and you have control over your reaction. And you can role model by inviting it, whether it's as a group member or as a leader. And when you're actually receiving it, view it as information, not definition. Your goal is to understand the sender's perception. So in some ways, this is just a repeat of what we've just done. You're going to use your active listening skills if you're receiving feedback. Your goal is to understand what this person coming to you, giving you feedback, what their perception is. And so you're going to use those active listening skills. As hard as it is, you're going to use them. And it can be really helpful, especially when there's power dynamics involved, to acknowledge the sender right off the bat. Hey, I know giving feedback is hard, and I just want to thank you for stepping up and having the courage to give me feedback. Remember, you're just getting their perception. You want to understand their perception. So you want to do your best to avoid problem solving at this point. We're not problem solving. You're just listening to them. Avoid defending yourself. You can ask them questions. You can use your active listening skills. And a lot of times, you're probably used to this when someone's giving you feedback, is you can be confused. Like, I don't understand. Can you give me more specifics? You can ask for that. Absolutely. And you're probably used to this too. If you get upset or they get upset or you both start getting upset, it's okay to stop. And you can just say something like, wow, I really want to hear what you have to say, and this conversation is going to go better if we meet at a different time. It's okay to do that. If you need more context, or if you need, sometimes group members will give me feedback and I feel like they don't understand the full context of my actions in a particular case. And I feel like it would help if I could give them more context. But I don't want to give them that context right away. I want them to feel like they were understood by me. And so, but if I feel like there's more context that would help, I would say, hey, if you would like to hear more context about like my thoughts during that situation and how I came to my decision, I'd be happy to meet with you another time, and we can have a longer conversation. You can, at the end, acknowledge them. Hey, I appreciate you bringing this up. I know it can really be difficult to give feedback to your instructor. I will really think about what you said. And then you can actually, if you're really acknowledging it and you want to take some action in changing, you can say, hey, I'll really try to address your concerns in the future. I want you to note, though, that when you end, you don't have to agree to what they want you to do. You don't have to. You can say, hey, I appreciate you bringing this up, and really be authentic about that. And if it seems like you can do this, you can say, I will really try to address this concern in the future. So those are different ways you can end. So giving feedback is different. You're on the other side of it. And in this case, I'm talking about just specifically giving constructive feedback. But honestly, this stuff applies to positive feedback too. It's just easier to do. But if you want to give someone feedback, you want to give it to them in a timely way. You don't want to give them that feedback 3 weeks later. But at the same time, you don't want to give that feedback to someone at the end of a day when you're exhausted and stressed and no one's eaten any food, and there's still things that need to be done before you can really go to bed. Like, you got to wait for the appropriate time and place. So it really helps to think through what you'd like to say first. Like, I use this all the time. If I want to give feedback to my group or a person in my group, I role play it out and rehearse it with my instructors first. Just think through and write it out and even rehearse it. Try to be specific, give examples, anticipate that question that someone's going to ask you, like, what, can you give me specific examples? Like, so think of them first. Try to be growth oriented, not, just putting them down, but suggestive of how they could grow by receiving this feedback and internalizing this. I think a lot of us have probably heard this before, but to use I statements. And this is where it can really help to write it out and rehearse it and talk it out with someone first. Because a lot of times when you're plugged in and you want to give feedback, you're really stuck in your own self, and you're like, this person did this, they did this, they did this, they did this. If you calm down and you really can talk it out with someone, you can start to change some of those statements into, okay, when you did this, this was how I reacted, or I think the result was this. So you're giving them a perception-based statement, and you're owning it from your own perception, from your own self. So use I statements. Give positive feedback too. I'm sure a lot of you have heard, like, if you're ever giving constructive feedback, try to get in there and give positive feedback first, then give your constructive feedback, and then give your more positive feedback at the end. I think we call that the feedback sandwich or something like that. That's good. People thrive off positive feedback, and we often forget. Include a request. Be clear, but emphasize the future. Hey, next time, could you do this? Could you ask for our input before you make a decision as a member of the leader team? So it's totally okay and expected to make a request. Now, you've got to deal with the person's reaction. They might get upset. And if they get upset, you have the power to stop the situation too. Just like I said in the previous slide, if you're receiving feedback and people are getting upset, you can stop. But you can also stop here if it seems like this is just not the right time. You have the power to stop it too. You might think about someone's reaction before you actually are approaching them. Again, it's just a wonderful practice to rehearse and talk it out with somebody first. And just, hey, you can ask your leader team, all right, I'm going to go to this person and give them feedback. Let's just anticipate what the reaction might be so I can be ready for it. Don't expect people to always be receptive. I'm sure most of us probably appreciate that. But no matter how much you spend time getting the upset out of your voice, being growth oriented, giving very specific examples, using your I statements and sandwiching it with positive feedback, you can think you've done it perfectly, and don't expect them to be receptive to it. Hearing constructive feedback is hard. It's just hard, and it's never gotten easier in my life, whether it's in my personal life or whether it's out in the field. But these things can help. So we're going to give you another time to go back to your same groups and discuss a feedback scenario as well. Well, let's see. Let me start here. We're gonna. You're not going to have to introduce yourself, but I'm going to give you another question where everybody can go around, and it's kind of a similar question to the listening question, where it's like, what do you feel like you're good at doing with feedback? Where do you want to improve with being able to give people feedback. And then there's a scenario, and we want to spend some time just discussing how to respond. And I just copied one of my slides onto the feedback, onto the breakout session guide, and you can follow along and talk it out, write it out, rehearse it. Say, you know, how would this sound if I said this? Anticipate what you think some reactions might be, and see if you can come up with a paragraph of how you might, like sentences you might take with you to approach this person in this scenario and give them feedback. I do that all the time. Like if I'm giving feedback with someone, I come with statements written in my journal. Like, okay, this is what I really want to try to say. Because it can be really hard when it's in that charged atmosphere, and it can be helpful just to have it written down. Last question, and this is something we'll address more when we get back from your breakout session, is a lot of you raised issues about what's called upward feedback. How do you give feedback to your boss? And take some time to just talk about that. And I have a whole slide on just some thoughts about how you do that. And that'll be part of our discussion when you get back. Remember to do the same thing. You can add valuable wisdom to the next Jamboard on feedback. And you can put a question in the chat if you want. Once you get back, we'll take a break right when you get back as well. I will try, and probably some of the rest of us will try to just jump into some breakout rooms, and we'll try not to bother you. We'll just sort of be a fly on the wall. But it'd just be fun to meet some of you. I'm just talking to my screen here. So, okay. Are there any additions? Did I forget anything, Sarah?
No, I noted a couple questions from the chat for later, but I was going to just suggest that you go in reverse alphabetical order this time in your breakout sessions so that people get more equitable speaking and listening time. So if you can figure that out, try to do that this time.
Okay, good. Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, we'll head back to the same breakout session and refer to your guide for the scenario and the questions. They're too much to put right here. So have fun. I'll see some of you in your breakout room. Okay, looks like we're mostly all back. That was fun. I made it to 2 breakout rooms. Man, there's a lot of them, but really good conversations. Thanks for letting me eavesdrop. What we'd like to do is take another break, 5 minutes. It's like I got 10:44 right now, so 10:49. Let's be back. And if you got a chance to put something on the Jamboard, different Jamboard on feedback, and you want to put any questions in the chat, we'll do a little bit longer debrief of this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about upward feedback, giving feedback to your boss. But go ahead, take 5 minutes. Just keep.
Thanks, Bernie.
Just keep the screen up, and I got a bunch of things jotted down. We'll take a couple minutes just to address a few things. A couple things I heard in the groups that I went to was just how hard it can be to not take feedback really personally. And I guess just acknowledging that that's the case and really making that clear to your group maybe can help. As an expectation, like setting that up beforehand, is to remind people to be growth oriented and look for the appropriate time and pay attention to how people are receiving what you're saying. Not saying that's going to fix things, but again, like anytime, my gut instinct when I think about issues is to think about the structure of the group. Like, what can I do in setting up the expectations to help minimize that possibility? Another thing I heard from a group was cultural differences and trying to learn how to be mindful of the fact that, you're giving the feedback you give to maybe your family or your wife or something, if you give that to someone who's has a very different background, it's the trajectory of how that goes could be very different. And I think it's just going to be important for all of us as a community to just keep learning how we can acknowledge cultural differences in how we give feedback. And I just feel like that's something we're in the learning stages of that. Like, and maybe the next workshop next year can be about that. That seems like a good topic. Let's see, a couple things I'm seeing on the Jamboard. Structuring feedback into your activities. Like, I structure feedback. Well, I meet with my leader group every day. And there is a placeholder for feedback every time we meet. And oftentimes it will be said, hey, does anybody have any feedback? Oftentimes there's no feedback, but it's there, it's a placeholder. It never gets dropped. So that's, to me, that's an important habit to be in. I saw someone write that. Someone noted the limitations of the feedback sandwich, like positive, then constructive, then positive. Yeah, it can feel kind of contrived. People know that you've pulled them aside and they're going to hear some constructive feedback. So sometimes it seems more appropriate and may be more appropriate just to give it. And just keep all those things in mind that we talked about when you're doing that. A lot of you in the Jamboard are noting, and I'm going to call this connection before correction. It's kind of a silly thing to say, but it's so important to greet whoever you're giving feedback to and connect with them and ask them how they're doing, and just, like, do the nice human thing of just talking with them first and just getting a sense of where they're at and checking in with them before you give them feedback. And then there's a couple questions in the chat, like, what if, let's see, someone asked, like, what if there's a true life-threatening emergency, like, and how would that affect giving somebody feedback? If they're doing something that is potentially increasing that life threat right there in front of you. To me, that's not, I don't know whether I'm interpreting the question right, but to me, that's not the appropriate time and place to give people feedback. If you're the leader, that's where, you really just want to be decisive and directive and like minimize the life threat if you can. And then maybe that's going to require like significant debriefing afterwards. And yeah, a bunch of us, I'm sure, have been through, critical incident stress debriefs or whatever, like where something really significant happened. And you got to come back and visit it and, open up the space to give people feedback and help people understand, if you were the leader, what your decision-making process was. So I could say a lot more about that, but we'll leave it there. What if feedback is biased? That's a tough one. I'm not exactly sure what is meant by that. I almost would say, like, almost, all feedback is biased in someone's personal perception. So I would encourage getting other perceptions on something. So if you've got if a leader's giving you the group member feedback and you're like, man, that doesn't make any sense to me, like, you might ask for another leader's perception. You might ask for another group member's perception. It can be hard if you're the group member. And we'll talk about upward feedback here in a sec. I think that's probably where I should leave it, because I want to talk about upward feedback here specifically, and I have a slide. So let me share my screen here. Okay, oh dear. Where did it go? Okay, does everybody see that? Okay. So we took a break, yay. Giving feedback to your boss, boy, like I saw this a lot and in the pre-survey, and I tried to find some information to be helpful. I'm sure we as a group can come up with a lot of good information here. But a couple things I just want to say, especially to the supervisors and the PIs out there, you really need to set up a space to welcome and maintain a safe space for feedback. Like that is really, that to me, that should just be a baseline expectation. It's still possible to give supervisors feedback when that supervisor or that PI doesn't do that. And I just tried to brainstorm some ways that you might increase the chances that you can actually give your feedback upward. A lot of you mentioned this in the first listening exercise, like good rapport is huge. So establish good rapport with your leader, with the person who's in charge of the experience you're part of, and do all those things we talked about, like connect with them, do fun things with them, listen to them. And then if you want to ask them, it can be really helpful, I think, to ask them within the context of the goals of whatever it is you're doing. So if you're out there to collect a bunch of data and do it accurately and do it efficiently, and then move on to the next and move on to the next, then really try to couch everything you say within helping that your leader improve upon and make it more likely that they'll reach their goals. It's helpful to ask, you want to ask about the future and not about the past. So if you're starting something new, you could ask a question like, hey, would it be helpful to you for me to give you some feedback now that we're starting this new transect or this new whatever plot or whatever? That's an opening. You obviously want to focus on your perspective, and it can be really tempting, and like especially those of you who are leaders in other contexts, you can be really tempted to just immediately go into what you would do if you were in charge. I would imagine that if you think about it, if someone just immediately starts talking about what they would do in your position, that would be hard to take. So focus on your perspective as a group member and within your realm of responsibility, not what you would do if you were the boss. Obviously, you should give them positive feedback. Everybody thrives off positive feedback. So give it. That's how you can establish good rapport, is to do that over and over and over again and wait for that opportune time when you can ask to give them constructive feedback. If they get defensive and upset, here's where, I mean, you could just suggest you stop and like revisit this later, but I don't want you to get stuck in the trap. And I think probably some supervisors do this. They don't, they're just willing to shut you down because they get defensive and upset. And then there's just no opportunity to give you feedback. So a question you could maybe ask is, this might not be the right time. What would be useful going forward? Rather than saying, than just giving up and saying, okay, let's just stop. So you can push it a little bit. But again, you got to think about your relationship and the rapport you've built with them before you try something like that. And then finally, the thing I'll say is you can try asking for feedback first. So, hey, I would really do a better job like helping this team reach its goals if you could give me some feedback on how I'm doing. And you could even prompt them with specific things. How do you see myself working with my group? How do you see myself collecting this data, whatnot? And maybe, I'm not saying this will be possible, but maybe after that, if you invite them to give you feedback and you role model accepting it graciously and listening and all those things we've talked about, then maybe you could respond by saying, hey, I'd be happy to give you some feedback too, if you'd find that useful. Maybe you're creating an opening for that. And this is all easy to say here in this presentation, and it's one that I'm more and more removed from, because I'm mostly, in my life as I get older, I'm mostly just a leader in charge. And so I invite anybody to put stuff in the chat or the Jamboard if you have specific advice or do's or don'ts, like put them on the Jamboard here about feedback. I'm interested in learning more. So anyway, that's what I have to say about power dynamics. But let's move on here. And let's do our last one. We're going to talk about addressing conflict. So I never want to address conflict. Never, ever, ever. Some of you might be more willing to do it. I never want to do it. When it comes up, and I almost just have it in there. I have a voice in my head that says, Chris, don't even entertain the question of whether you want to approach someone about the conflict. Just do it. Like, it's almost certainly going to help if you try to address it. Let me rephrase that. In some cases, it's going to help. We're going to talk about like how to think about how you're going to address conflict here in a second. But I never want to do it. And I try not to entertain that voice. I just like, okay, I just got to deal with this. I can deal with this. I can see the good that can come out on the other side. So it's good to think about like why conflict arises in a group. This can really help when you approach someone. It could be that your roles and expectations are just unclear and you need to clarify them. And maybe you just never communicated your actual expectations and you need to get in there and actually communicate them so that they understand. That's a much harder place to be in. That's why it's so important to state them and get buy-in at the beginning, because it can be really hard to like reel your group in, like, once they've started to do things that are outside your expectations. Sometimes individual needs are just not being met. So somebody might not feel like they're getting enough alone time, or they're not getting, the group's moving too fast. Like they're just physically not able to keep up, just all kinds of things. So it's important to think about, okay, this person that has the conflict, are we meeting their individual needs? Like their social needs, their, just biological needs. Those are important. Sometimes, I guess I said this, roles and expectations need to be modified. Your group is different, and you set up these expectations, but it's like, okay, it's not working for this group. I need to modify it. And then probably the hardest one is when someone just doesn't buy in to your safe learning environment, your expectations, your roles. That's hard. That's just really hard. And that's why I say at the bottom here, some conflicts are just unresolvable. And it's, I don't know we can have a broader conversation about that. And I'm sure some of you have ended experiences where it's like, okay, that kind of sucked. We got through it though. Okay, but it's important when you are wanting to address conflict to think about what your goals are. And maybe some of you have seen this. I'm not a big fan of like harping on models of things, but I do find this kind of useful. I think this is called like the Thomas Kilmann something conflict index or something. But it can be really helpful, I think, to think about like choosing my battles, like what conflicts am I actually going to address in my group? So, and you might think of it like this. Think about like you're going fishing with your friend. And you really, you have a day to spend together with your friend. You want to go fishing, they want to go on a picnic. So how important is your relationship to your friend, and how important are your own needs? Your own needs are, I really want to go fishing. Your relationship is with them. So that can help you think about, well, how do you want to approach an issue that comes up? Maybe your friend really doesn't want to go fishing and you're willing to accommodate that. Or maybe you're like, this is my only day off, I really want to go fishing, and you just really want to compete with them and really say, come on, go fishing. Now, obviously in a group, it gets more complicated, right? So, but let's just talk about these to help, as a way to help you think about, what goals, what conflicts are you gonna pick out and actually attempt to do something about? So starting with avoiding, there's some things that you might just want to avoid, to sidestep or postpone. This would be a type of conflict where, if you want to avoid it, it's appropriate when the issue's trivial, or it seems like there's just no chance of it resolving. Or maybe people are too charged. So you got to let people cool down, and you just avoid it until people cool down. Or you might just be like, you know what? Once my PI gets back here, they can deal with it. I'm not prepared to deal with it, so I'm going to avoid it and bump it to them. So that might be an example of avoiding. Accommodating. So in this case, your relationship with someone is really important, and you're willing to sacrifice some of your own needs. So this would be an appropriate time where you might think about this and what you want to do about a conflict, and is to surrender somewhat and let someone else have their way. Well, you might be wrong. Maybe you're wrong, and maybe that's a reason to accommodate. Or maybe the issue is more important to someone else than it is to you, and you can really see that when you're talking to them. Or maybe, and this is an example in a leadership role, when you can build social credit with your group. If you're willing to accommodate some of your needs for the group or for members of the group, you get serious social cred for doing that. So think about that when you see conflicts come up. If you're willing to accommodate, that can really go a long way in your group. You can also, if you're just like, well, I know they're probably doing the wrong thing, but I feel like this is a great learning opportunity, let them do it. Let them learn from their own mistakes. I've done that plenty of times. Now, you got to obviously keep track of whether you think it's a safe situation, but you can let them learn by their own mistakes. Up in the upper left, competing and directing, this is a more power-oriented move. And this more appropriate, when decisions need to happen quickly, or where unpopular actions need to happen, or when you just know you're right. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes you might have to deal with the ramifications of making a really directive decision and jumping in and resolving a conflict by saying, we're just going to do it my way. But sometimes that has to happen, especially when safety issues come up. Collaborating, up there in the upper right, this really involves engaged problem solving, where both parties value the relationship and you value your needs, and so you're really working together to try to come up with something where everybody feels invested in the decision. It's appropriate when consensus is important and you want to try to merge insights. You want to get people's insights. It's appropriate when you're trying to learn as a group, how to operate. Or maybe both sets of concerns, yours and theirs, seem equally important. And finally, compromising in the middle is it's like collaborating, but in an expedient way, where it's okay, we don't have all day to make this decision and resolve this conflict. So you're making a compromise between expediency and collaboration, and something that's mutually acceptable. So this can be really appropriate when you're dealing with a conflict of someone that's equal in power to you. Maybe it's someone on your instructor team. Maybe it's someone in your group, if you're a group member. It can be helpful when time is of the essence. You have to make your decision soon. Okay, so with that in mind, actually, let me jump back here for a second. Like some conflicts, actually, no, let's just keep going. So just do it. If there's conflicts in your group, step in there and engage with the process. And I like this recipe. It's similar to feedback. It's similar to listening. We're basically just accumulating skills here and putting them all here in resolving conflict. So plan out what you're going to do. Again, talk it out with your leader team. If you don't have a leader team, call somebody if you can. Think connection before correction. I think I already used that in this little debrief we did, but think connection before correction. Identify what you're noticing and set up a time to meet. You don't want to just approach somebody and immediately grab them and start doing conflict resolution with them. Tell them what you're noticing. Hey, I noticed you were really frustrated last night in the group meeting, and I just want to set up a time to just hear, what was going on from your perspective, and talk about what we can do moving forward. Can we meet tomorrow evening? Give them some time to really digest the fact that you're going to have this conversation with them, and let them have some ownership in deciding when they're going to feel most comfortable having that conversation. Think about what your goals are at the meeting, and you might think about okay, well, what's going on here? Are my expectations not being met? So my goals are to clarify my expectations. Or maybe I see this as a collaborative, we can collaboratively problem solve this out. So I really want to collaboratively problem solve with you at this meeting. State that at the beginning. Take time to listen. You need to give them the space to share their perspective, and you need to use your active listening skills so that they feel heard. So all those things we practiced, you got to get that. You got to get that in there, and that can be really hard. You can try to anticipate what you think their side of the story is beforehand. You can invite feedback. You can give feedback, and then you want to take one of several actions. You want to make a request. Perhaps you want to clarify your expectations and suggest ways they can meet them. Or maybe you just want to say, hey, I realize this isn't working, and I really see that your needs are just as important as my needs. Let's problem solve and figure out a way that we can both win in this situation. Maybe somebody just needs to understand the ramifications of their actions. So you need to be a conduit for helping them understand how other people are perceiving what they've done. And so helping them understand. And maybe, it doesn't all get worked out right then and there. So you need to agree to meet again and continue discussing. And, maybe you set some specific goals. Hey, in the next few days, I really want to see you, do this, this, and this. And let's meet again in 2 days and check in and talk about how that's been going. Okay. So there's a recipe. So let's do another breakout session. Woohoo! And I must say, I apologize. We're going to have new groups of 3 or 4. So I forgot to tell you to say farewell to your previous group, but let's do new groups. Again, let's go by alphabetic order. We can go by first name in alphabetical order this time again. I'll give you a chance to just introduce yourself. So you got 5 minutes to do that. And then I have a question similar to the question about feedback and about listening. Give everybody a chance to just share what they find challenging and what they feel like they're a strength they have with respect to conflict resolution. And then I really want to give you time here to dive into this scenario. This is a more complicated scenario than the one we talked about with feedback. It's in the breakout session guide. I won't read it to you here. Please have someone read it so you can understand what's going on. I tried to set as much context as possible, but use the recipe. Try to plan it out first as a group. What would you say? You know, what would you anticipate their reaction being? What feedback would you want to give them? You know, all kinds of things like that. Use that recipe to help you. And then take some time to just discuss this. What this particular scenario involves gender dynamics. And a lot of you brought that up in the pre-course survey. And this is a tough one. But go ahead and do that same thing. You can add things to the Jamboard 3. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat when we come back. And if you want to spend like a couple minutes just in silence to have some time to just really like reflect on this whole thing that we've done, because we're getting here, we're toward wrapping up, feel free to do that too. We're going to give you more time, 23 minutes. So have fun. I'll come to some breakout rooms.
Wow. I'll admit, as soon as that red light comes on, we all stop talking. Let me see, do I have the right one up?
Yeah, this is the right one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's only 25 people. Well, I guess you can still go to the Jamboard, but they're coming.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like most everyone's back. I just made it to one group. It was so great just to hear that conversation in the one group. But to know there was like 39 other ones going on, that was really cool. If you want to put something in the Jamboard, go for it. We'll do something to summarize this, because we're obviously not going to get to everybody. And if you have a question in the chat, you can put a question in the chat, and we're not going to take a break here. We're just going to go to the end here. And a lot of this is we'll talk about this conflict here a little bit first, but then if you have general questions, you can also ask general questions as we get to the end. So we've got about maybe 15-ish minutes until noon. So I'll just say a couple things while people are maybe adding things to the Jamboard or asking questions. Some things that came up that I thought of as I was listening to the folks in the group I went to is just the importance of it. Again, like I just come back to expectations. You need to make sure people understand, and you might even need to make sure your supervisors support this, that there's a way that you can extract a person from your course or from your trip. Like if they're not going to meet your expectations and they're going to create unsafe spaces, you need to have the option to remove them. And sometimes that's not clear and you haven't stated that. I state that in the beginning of my goals, roles, and expectations talk with my groups, is just to know that's an option. We need you to meet our community expectation standards. And one is that, everybody needs to feel safe and respected in the environment that we work in. So, and speaking of that, probably a lot of us are used to now having a specific discussion about harassment and what it is and what the ramifications of it are and what your responsibilities are as a leader in terms of harassment. And if you don't do that, I would highly encourage you to include that in your conversations you have with people at the beginning. That said, this situation you may not need to go anywhere close to that. This might be a situation where this person just does not really understand or know how they're coming across to the people in their group. And so that might be what you need. That's your request, or that's your action that you're taking when you're having a conversation, is really sharing with them how they're being interpreted and perceived by other people in the group. And that might be enough to get somebody to really think more closely about what they're saying and how they're coming across. It may just get them upset, but it may also help them see how they're coming across. And I've definitely had that come up when I've addressed young male students like that, where it's hard, it's a difficult conversation, and but in the end, you're helping them see something that they haven't seen about themselves yet. So couple other things that came up, and then I'll just talk about some general things about gender and then open it up for questions. And again, this is just like awareness on my part, like as a female leader, like what one of the folks in our group shared was just, I don't know if I'm going to feel safe talking to Jordan by myself. Like, that's not something that I really have to deal with. And I'm just like, again, all of us need to like really think about being self-aware and what our limitations are and where our blinders are. It's like, I usually feel safe approaching someone, but really like understanding that someone may not feel that way. And how are you going to do that as a young, short, maybe female grad student to a large, young, boisterous male undergrad? Like, that can be really intimidating. So we brainstormed a few examples in that group about what you could do about that situation. I'll just leave you with a few thoughts here, and then like, I'm sure Sarah's looking at the Jamboard, and if there's questions, you can ask me. Sometimes, like, I mean, when I brought this example up, I didn't necessarily want to reduce it to gender. Like, and in some cases, a more empowering way to approach this is to try to remove the gender from it if you can. And you can help your group appreciate the different qualities of leadership. And just to give you a few like continuums that you could have a conversation with your group about in the beginning, and help them understand that, leaders have to be goal oriented. You have goals out there, but they also have to be process oriented. And both of those skills are important. And again, you don't have to present it as that cleaving along gender. You can just have that as a conversation, and brainstorm ways with your group about why process is important and what process looks like, and why goals are important and what being goal oriented looks like. And that might help your group, again, value, everyone in your group, value when someone's being more process oriented or when someone's being more goal oriented. So similarly, you can, another continuum is that same continuum that we talked about in the conflict resolution, that chart, Thomas Kilmann thing, where it's like your own needs as the leader or as someone in the group are important, and your relationship to other people are really important. Both those things are really important as a leader, as a group member. What does it look like when you're really valuing someone's relationship? You know, how does that show up as a leader? Like, what do you do? Like, what characteristics to look for to see when someone's really valuing the relationship building within the group, versus like you're the group leader and you're trying to work towards goals. What does it look like to be, you know, addressing your own needs within that context of also your relationship with the rest of the group? So I just want to raise them, and you can raise them with a group, and you don't have to bring gender in. And to me, I think when I'm mentoring people, I'm always thinking about how to mentor people, like when I'm out there. But I want to find and encourage their strengths, and I want to help them experiment with different leadership styles. And, you know, thinking about that continuum of like process-oriented versus goal-oriented can help, like, and just help people move into those different boxes, you know, of being more process-oriented or more goal-oriented or more collaborative, or, you know, those different things that we showed on that Thomas Kilmann graph. So that's what I wanted to say about this scenario. So I have really not been looking at the Jamboard. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions, not much, but do you want to, are there any questions out there that you want to ask, Sarah?
Let's see, I'll just add that there's a lot of good information on these Jamboards. And I know that in some of the previous ones, and perhaps in this one as well, there's some things on the second and third pages. We'll organize some of this and consolidate it a bit and then share them as PDFs on the training sort of hub page that we've shared before, where the recordings and associated documents are going to be posted. So you can have access to it later, and we can, you know, maybe I'll reflect a little bit on some of these things because it's quite a bit to process right now. As far as questions, let me open up the chat and we could see. I do want to acknowledge there's, you know, a number of discussions kind of going on in the chat. And I think it's an important segue also to acknowledge that next week we have a session led by two researchers from Cornell that'll get into a lot of these issues in more detail and present some, you know, similar but even possibly more challenging scenarios. So we're certainly don't need to address all of it today. Hopefully most of you will be able to join again next week. We'll continue some of these conversations regarding gender bias and identity prejudice. So let's see. Questions. I don't see any. Let's see. I got behind a bit in the chat, so I apologize. It's a little hard to figure out the whole thread there. I did want to note that someone said it might not be possible to remove someone from the group. For example, if you're working internationally, do you have any suggestions on how to address that? You know, what range of solutions may be possible if like full removal and replacing that team member is not a possibility?
That's a great question. There are certainly lots of in-between things you can do with, you know, helping coach a student to act within your safe learning environment boundary. I mean, certainly just starting by giving them feedback and, making a request that they, next time, can you X whatever. And sometimes that can work. Sometimes you need to have a longer discussion and, uh, lay out some very specific things that require more of the conflict resolution type recipe that we just went through. Um, and you could move from sort of a verbal, like, okay, I request that you do these 5 things and we check in 2 days. That could be like a step beyond just like a casual giving feedback. Then you could go to a verbal, like, I need you to do these 5 things and we're going to check in 2 days. And if that doesn't work, you could move to a written contract that spells it out. And it's just getting more, I guess, I don't know what the word is, official. um, and sometimes the gravity of something written can help somebody really step up to the plate there. Yeah, it can be really hard to remove people. I understand, even in the States, when we're way out there, it's a pain in the butt to get somebody out. We're in the middle of nowhere. So, but do all those things like, maintaining your safe learning environment, communicating to them, modifying your expectations so that they feel like they can fit in. Maybe you have to do a little compromise, and problem solving it out. All those types of things to feel like they're invested in it in some ways, that can help. But I don't have a magic, like something that's going to fix all situations. So.
A related question, Chris, what about between field seasons? And I know for you, when you do field courses, you may have a completely different cohort of students, so this may not be quite as applicable for all situations. But if these issues have come up with the team for one field season, and then you're back on campus or doing other things, and you're preparing to go out again, do you have suggestions that maybe the team can evolve and improve on some of these situations, or kind of lessen the
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest, like, I don't know all campuses have this resource, but we have a resource here on UCSC called the Experiential Leadership Program. So we kind of have a leadership coach who we can ask to help us. We even have a conflict resolution coach who can come in and do little workshops with groups. In fact, the conflict resolution coach actually, like, comes in for staff and faculty and administrators, all levels at our institution. If you don't have that at your university, if you want me to reach out to the folks here, I know my friend who's the leadership coach does things outside of UCSC, but that can be really helpful, is to have someone come in that's just outside your organization. And it just sets up this space where people can talk more honestly about what's going on. And you as the leader can participate rather than facilitate. That can be huge. So yeah, I would say look for training like that.
I'll add also for more staff positions, most campuses, I think all campuses have some type of ombuds type of resource as well that can help with coach between sort of conflict issues between employees or faculty. And then I think someone made an important point here as far as, like, if the person's not on your team anymore, but they're moving on and they kind of have a legacy of this type of behavior that impacts multiple groups. We'll certainly talk about that more when it comes to harassment and assault and other issues in some of the other workshops, as far as like reporting options that people have when there's misconduct. And certainly there's a history of that in field sciences as well, when there's sort of people having a career of negative impacts on various people they interact with and supervise over time. So some of these challenges will come up again in our later topics. So just want to add that.
Do you want to show your, I think we should show your final slides, huh?
That's all right. I think I do just want to remind people that the evaluations are really helpful for us as we continue to grow this type of content and adapt it and evolve it to your needs and your requests. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that. Recordings, all the documents are all on that Riverside training site that we've shared multiple times and I've shared via email. And then next week, we'll move on to the next topic, and we will start a little bit later next week. It'll be at 10 a.m. That'll be a 2-hour session. I think from now on, they're all 2 hours. But I do think this one in particular, I really appreciate Chris putting all the work in to develop these valuable breakout sessions. Hopefully you also found them valuable. And I think the 3 hours, certainly was well spent on these difficult topics. So unless anyone has any last question, I think we can wrap up for today and just thank Chris for all his valuable advice and content he shared.
Great, thanks everybody. Yeah, look, I didn't put my contact info, but if you ever have a question, feel free to call. I learned so much from hearing about what's going on in different situations, so I really appreciate just engaging in conversation about this. I've even had friends call me from the field, like completely unexpectedly, which is kind of fun. So yeah, be safe, have fun, do good science. Yeah, and we'll keep doing this.